It is 2:47 in the morning, Alaska Standard Time, April 3rd, 2026. Right now, a cascading physical failure is occurring in the St. Elias Mountains that changes every risk model for the entire United States West Coast. This is not a slow multi-decadal grind. It is happening in catastrophic real time. The focus is Yakutat Bay, Alaska, specifically the terminal front of the Hubbard Glacier complex. What scientists saw in the last hour's data feed has upended geophysical assumptions. The automated sensor array, a joint operation by the USGS Alaska Science Center and the NOAA National Tsunami Warning Center, positioned along the eastern flank where the ice front meets the unstable mountain rock, registers an unprecedented ground vibration signature. The system's onboard classifier initially flags it as a magnitude 3.8 seismic event with a 2-kilometer depth focus, but the waveforms are too long, too complex. The duty seismologist at the NTWC in Palmer, a veteran geophysicist named Dr. Ben Carter, stares at his monitor, the coffee routine forgotten. He has spent 20 years classifying Alaskan seismic activity. He knows this isn't a simple tectonic shift. Then, the collocated GNSS displacement sensors begin reporting simultaneously, not one, but all 18 nodes across the lower glacier trunk. They move in unison. In 60 seconds, the primary displacement monitoring line moves 14 meters seaward. For context, in the previous 30 days, the average advancement rate had been less than 2 centimeters per hour. The ice is accelerating at rates without any recorded modern precedent. Dr. Carter initiates the high-level alert protocol. The data coming in is so far outside normal parameters that two separate data validation routines flag it as an instrumentation malfunction and enter diagnostic loops. They were not malfunctioning. The ice is moving. The entire terminal face, a structure of ice that has stood over 200 feet above the waterline for nearly a century, has fractured and is entering the fjord at an accelerating velocity that defies conventional glaciological theory. The water of Yakutat Bay is moving, and the millions of people in coastlines, thousands of miles to the south, have no idea what is coming towards them. At 3:15 a.m. AST, April 3rd, 2026, less than 30 minutes after the initial detection, the USGS Alaska Science Center confirms the mechanism of failure: catastrophic marine ice sheet instability, MISI, coupled with a massive rock slope failure. The technical analysis, immediately shared with NOAA, describes a worst-case geological feedback loop. The Hubbard Glacier-specific bathymetry has always been its weak point. The bed, the rock surface beneath the ice, sits far below sea level, and cruelly, it slopes downward as it moves inland. This is what geophysicists call a retrograde slope. As the ice at the front cools, it exposes deeper, unstable sections to relatively warmer, salty ocean water eating at its base. The process is self-sustaining and accelerating, but the April 2026 event added a terrifying second variable. The glacier's massive retreat over the preceding decade had debutized the adjacent mountain flank, a weak metamorphic rock layer known to geologist Dr. Sarah Chen at the University of Alaska Fairbanks as the Disenchantment Shear Zone. Unburdened by the weight of the ice, this weak layer fails along a 3-mile front. It is a coupled system collapse. The rock slide hits the ice front. The ice front accelerates the slope failure. At 3:45 a.m., seismographs across the Alaska Tsunami Monitoring Network record the peak of the collapse. The analysis shows a single cascading failure event unfolding over approximately 105 minutes. The magnitude of the displacement is overwhelming. 3.9 cubic kilometers of combined ice and rock enter Yakutat Bay and the outer Disenchantment Bay in that single window. To comprehend this volume, imagine a block of solid material the size of Manhattan, but stacked twice the height of the Empire State Building, hitting deep water in under 2 hours. The water displacement sends shock waves through oceanographic monitoring buoys as far south as Washington and Oregon within 3 hours. By 5:30 a.m. AST, the phrase that no emergency coordinator ever wants to use is typed into critical infrastructure only satellite email chains between NOAA, USGS, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and FEMA, a Pacific Basin Mega-Tsunami. This type of ocean event is fundamentally different from an earthquake-generated tsunami. It doesn't rely on the sudden vertical uplift of a fault line. It relies on the extreme initial height generated by massive volume displacement. Computational fluid dynamics models run at the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory in Seattle predict wave heights at the exit of Yakutat Bay of an unimaginable 90 to 120 meters, that is over 300 feet of water moving at jetliner speed. The vulnerability of coastal infrastructure from Bellingham, Washington to San Diego, California has been instantly elevated from theoretical to critical. While a mega-tsunami decays or attenuates as its energy spreads across the open ocean, the attenuation models for an event of this magnitude are where the true alarm lives. We cannot rely on foreign parallels. We must look to US soil and the physics of the St. Elias region to understand the scale of what is approaching the lower 48. The most crucial historical analog is right here, July 9, 1958, Lituya Bay, Alaska. In that event, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake on the Fairweather Fault triggered a landslide of approximately 30.6 million cubic meters of rock into the narrow inlet. It was a single mass entering an enclosed space. The resulting wave ran up the opposite shoreline to an astonishing height of 1,720 feet, the highest wave ever recorded in modern history. The 1958 Lituya event was confined to a remote inlet and caused only 5 deaths because there was no adjacent open ocean pathway. The April 3, 2026 Yakutat collapse involves 3.9 cubic kilometers, that is 127 times more material than the Lituya landslide, and it is directed into a bay geometry that channels the initial wave energy directly into the open Pacific, aimed squarely at the US West Coast. The physics are horrifying. As the wave propagates south, NOAA's network of dart buoys, deep ocean assessment and reporting of tsunamis in the Gulf of Alaska begin registering anomalous water column pressure readings before 6 a.m. AST. These instruments, designed to detect ocean-wide propagation, confirm the wave train is moving. The latest propagation models from the National Tsunami Warning Center suggest the arrival of wave energy starting at the Washington and Oregon coastlines in approximately 4 to 5 hours, reaching the California coast in 6 to 8 hours, and San Diego and Honolulu, Hawaii in 9 to 11 hours. An arrival of 6 hours for a major city like San Francisco may sound like a generous evacuation window, but it is not. The logistical reality is terrifying when applied to a dense urban corridor on a weekday morning with no prior notice. During the 2011 Tohoku tsunami that originated near Japan, waves took approximately 9 hours to reach the US West Coast, giving ample warning. Even with that lead time, the infrastructure at Crescent City, California was severely damaged, and 1 person died while watching the water. The April 2026 event gives a fraction of that time to move 20 million people. In every natural disaster, behind the data are personal stories of survival and loss, of warnings received too late, and of systems overwhelmed. The 3.9 cubic kilometer displacement on April 3, 2026 created instant victims in Yakutat Bay before the wave could even propagate. Elias Thorne, a 48-year-old Tlingit fisherman from Yakutat, was on his boat, the Sea Wolf, anchored 10 miles inside the bay. He was a man who knew those waters intimately. He told an emergency responder later that the first sign was not sound, but a strange, deep vibration in his very bones. Then the sound arrived, a sound he described as not a cracking or a boom, but a visceral, grinding surrender of the landscape itself. When he looked towards the head of the bay, the horizon was gone, replaced by a wall of white water and ice. The wave at his position was still amplifying. Thorne only survived because his boat was lifted by the wave crest and carried over the sand spit into the open Gulf of Alaska. Most other vessels were instantly pulverized. 1,500 miles south, in the Seattle Office of Emergency Management, Director Marcus Ramirez received the high-level alert at 7:15 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. His first action was to look at the traffic cams on I-5. They were already at 70% capacity with morning commuters. The standard tsunami evacuation protocols for the city were designed for tectonic tsunamis with 15 minutes of warning, focusing only on the low-lying waterfront and harbor areas, which sit at an elevation of 2 to 5 meters. Ramirez had to make a decision: issue a citywide alert that would paralyze the city on a chaotic Tuesday morning, or follow the data which projected wave heights of 8 to 14 meters arriving at the mouth of Puget Sound within 4 hours. A partial refraction into the sound would still likely produce devastating surge in downtown Seattle and Tacoma. He knew a formal evacuation was impossible in that timeline. It would be a suggestion, a prayer against engineering limits. But the conversation that needs to happen publicly and loudly is about the infrastructure that cannot be evacuated. The Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which handles over $200 billion in U.S. economic trade annually, is a massive vulnerability. Its average elevation is approximately 3 meters. A 6 to 12 meter wave event would inundate the entire container complex, cause catastrophic failure of massive gantry cranes, rupture petrochemical storage facilities, and cripple the rail hub corridors that feed the rest of the nation. In San Francisco, the wave energy would funnel through the Golden Gate, amplifying its height and velocity as it entered the bay, threatening critical transportation links like the Bay Bridge and the low-lying SFO airport. The financial heart of San Francisco's financial district sits only 1 to 2 meters above sea level. The potential damage is counted not in millions, but in tens of thousands of lives and hundreds of billions of US dollars. The April 3, 2026 event in Alaska reveals that the entire timeline is wrong. Climate dynamics models, as recently as the 2021 IPCC reports, projected that this scale of large-scale marine ice sheet instability, leading to a transoceanic mega-tsunami risk, would become a plausible feature of a warming planet by 2045 to 2055, not 2026. The geophysical reality has accelerated past our projections by decades. What does the new normal look like? The Greenland ice sheet has lost 28 trillion tons of ice since 1990, raising global sea levels. The Gulf of Alaska's immense tidewater glaciers are undergoing similar rapid systemic reorganizations, but their proximity to US coastlines creates an immediate coupled threat that can manifest in an afternoon. Scientists like Dr. Chen at UAF have already identified that the April 2026 collapse likely destabilized the entire eastern slope of Yakutat Bay, making subsequent failures inevitable as the system seeks new equilibrium. The data shows 3 other major US glacial complexes: the Columbia Glacier near Valdez, the massive Hubbard Glacier remnant further east, and the Fairweather Range over steepened flanks are in similar precarious retrograde bathymetric configurations with weak rock coupling. If Yakutat was the first domino in this region, the next ones are now under increased strain. This instability affects more than just fishing boats and coastline. US nuclear power plants, such as the Diablo Canyon power plant in California, have tsunami defense walls designed for historical earthquakes, not mega-tsunami surge events of 15 plus meters. refineries, major naval installations like Naval Base San Diego, and the very corridors of Interstate 5 and the Pacific Coast Highway are vulnerable. A single failure on a remote Alaskan glacier can paralyze the logistical heart of the US West Coast for months. We are here not because of a hypothetical. We are here because information is the only early warning system that is currently working. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean right now, that energy is still moving. The waves are attenuating, their heights dropping, but their energy remains massive. The best case scenario is that the uncertainty range works in our favor, and the arrival is a manageable surge. But the 3.9 cubic kilometers of rock and ice that hit the ocean on April 3rd are not going back. The glacier is still moving, still retreating, and the other vulnerable systems are still sitting on their slopes with warming water eating at their base. Follow the data. Stay safe. 3:55 a.m. Alaska Standard Time. At the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, the silence of the overnight shift has been replaced by the rhythmic high-frequency chirping of the DART-2 Deep Ocean Assessment and Reporting of Tsunamis system. Specifically, buoy 46419, located on the shelf break of the Gulf of Alaska, has switched from its standard reporting mode to its 4-mode event trigger. It's reporting a sea surface height anomaly that shouldn't be possible from a non-seismic event. Dr. Ben Carter looks at the raw pressure data. The water column above the seafloor sensor has risen by 1.8 meters in less than 45 seconds. This is the shock wave of the initial displacement, a wall of kinetic energy moving at the speed of a commercial jetliner. By 4:10 a.m., the USGS Alaska Science Center's automated analysis of the 3.9 cubic kilometer collapse is disseminated to FEMA Region 10 and the US Army Corps of Engineers. The geophysical profile is devastating. The Hubbard Glacier didn't just shed ice, it suffered a complete structural failure of its subglacial pinning point. Dr. Sarah Chen, a leading glaciologist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, joins the emergency conference call via a secure link. Her voice, usually measured and academic, is brittle. What we are seeing is the final realization of the Marine Ice Cliff Instability (MICI) hypothesis, she tells the team. The ice cliff at the terminal phase exceeded its structural threshold. Once it reached 100 meters in height above the water and 300 meters below, the sheer weight of the ice exceeded the strength of the crystalline lattice. It shattered. It's a cascading failure. The back pressure that was holding the Russell Fjord rock wall in place is gone. The technical reality of the disenchantment shear zone, a local geological term for the unstable metamorphic rock flanking the glacier, is the secondary killer. Without the ice's 400-meter thick physical brace, the mountain itself is falling into the bay. At 4:22 a.m., ground-based LiDAR stations, maintained by the National Park Service near Yakutat, register a 120-centimeter vertical drop in the adjacent ridge. The debris flow isn't just ice, it's a slurry of pulverized granite and silt, which is significantly denser than water. This density is a force multiplier. At 4:40 a.m., the first high-resolution wave propagation models are generated by the NOAA Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory in Seattle. The lead engineer on the project looks at the output and refuses to sign off until the algorithm is rerun. The numbers are unsurvivable. The model predicts a primary surge wave exiting Yakutat Bay with a peak amplitude of 115 meters. As this wave hits the open Pacific, it won't just dissipate. The bathymetry of the Gulf of Alaska, specifically the continental slope, acts as a lens, focusing the wave energy directly toward the Cascadia subduction zone's coastal margin. This is not a standard tsunami, Dr. Chen explains in her report to the National Security Council at 5 a.m. In a tectonic tsunami, the wavelength is long, but the height in the open ocean is often less than a meter. Here, because of the sheer volume of the Hubbard-Russell collapse, the initial height is so extreme that the nonlinear wave dynamics are taking over. We are looking at a coherent wall of water that will arrive at the Washington and Oregon coastlines not as a rising tide, but as a breaking bore. By 5:15 a.m., the first casualties are confirmed. U.S. Coast Guard Air Station Sitka, attempting a pre-dawn damage assessment, reports that the village of Yakutat has been essentially erased. The 300-foot wave reflected off the bay walls and scoured the peninsula to the bedrock. There are no thermal signatures. At 5:30 a.m., the realization of the timeline hits the emergency coordinators. The wave is moving at 450 miles per hour. It will reach the Columbia River entrance and the ports of Grace Harbor, Washington, and Coos Bay, Oregon, by 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. The infrastructure vulnerability is staggering. The Pacific Northwest's coastal defenses were built for a 1-in-100-year storm surge or a major tectonic event with a 20-minute local warning. They were not built for a 60-foot vertical wall of water arriving from the north with 4 hours of lead time. FEMA's internal Cascadia Rising exercise from 2016 is being dusted off, but the parameters are wrong. That exercise assumed a magnitude 9.0 earthquake would cause the damage. This time, the ground isn't shaking. The sun is coming up over the Cascades on a beautiful, clear Tuesday morning, and the ocean looks calm. But the pressure sensors, 2,000 feet below the surface, are screaming. The sensors are reporting a mass of water moving with enough kinetic energy to displace the entire US West Coast economy in a single morning. By 6 a.m., the Department of Homeland Security begins the process of clear skies, an immediate grounding of all civilian aircraft on the West Coast to clear frequencies and runways for mass evacuation efforts that they already know are mathematically impossible to complete. To truly grasp the magnitude of what is screaming across the Pacific toward the lower 48, we have to look at the terrifying precedent set within our own borders. When scientists talk about the Lituya Bay event of July 9, 1958, they aren't talking about a tragedy. They are talking about a physical anomaly that redefined the limits of terrestrial physics. On that night, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake on the Fairweather Fault in Alaska triggered a landslide of 30 million cubic meters of rock into the Gilbert Inlet at the head of Lituya Bay. The resulting wave hit the opposite shoreline at a height of 1,720 feet. It stripped the mountain to its bedrock, erasing trees that had stood for centuries. But Lituya Bay was a closed system. The energy was trapped. What happened at the Hubbard Glacier on April 3, 2026, is Lituya Bay on a continental scale, with the door wide open. The 3.9 cubic kilometers of displacement in Yakutat Bay is 130 times larger than the Lituya Slide. It is more volume than the entire North Slope oil reserve in a single moving mass. As this energy enters the open ocean, the physics change. We aren't looking at a standard tsunami wavelength. Earthquake-generated tsunamis usually have a wavelength of 100 miles, but an open ocean height of only a few feet. A displacement-generated Mega-Tsunami is different. It is a short period wave with extreme vertical amplitude. According to the NOAA, National Centers for Environmental Information, the energy density in the first wave train is 40 times higher than the wave that hit Japan in 2011. Current propagation models from the USGS and the NOAA RIFT real-time forecasting of tsunami system are pinpointing the focusing zones. Tsunami energy doesn't travel equally in all directions. It follows the bathymetry, the underwater canyons and ridges of the seafloor. The most alarming data point in the 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time update is the Crescent City focus. Crescent City, California, has long been known as the tsunami capital of the lower 48. Because of the specific shape of the continental shelf and the Cobb Seamount chain, the city acts like a concave mirror focusing wave energy into its harbor. In 1964, following the Great Alaska Earthquake, a tsunami traveled 1,600 miles and hit Crescent City with such force that it destroyed 29 city blocks and killed 11 people. That wave was only 6 meters high. The April 3rd models are projecting a first wave arrival in Crescent City at a height of 22 to 28 meters, nearly 90 feet. Further north, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, USACE, is tracking the interaction between the wave and the Columbia River Bar, often called the Graveyard of the Pacific. The Columbia River discharges roughly 265,000 cubic feet of water per second into the ocean. When the incoming 50-foot wave bore hits that outgoing current at 8:45 a.m., the resulting hydraulic jump will likely create a secondary surge that will travel upriver, threatening the low-lying infrastructure of Astoria, Oregon, and potentially reaching as far inland as the port of Portland. The USACE Safe Coast simulations never accounted for a 50-foot vertical wall of water hitting at peak outgoing tide. The science of system coupling is the final terrifying twist. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, which runs from Vancouver Island down to northern California, is a tectonic pressure cooker that hasn't seen a major rupture since 1700. Geologists at the USGS are concerned about loading stress, the sheer weight of a 20-meter wall of water suddenly pressing down on the shallow continental shelf can theoretically trigger secondary seismic events or underwater landslides on the already stressed Cascadia Shelf. This isn't just a wave, it's a massive moving weight that is physically deforming the crust as it travels. The statistics coming out of the NOAA, National Weather Service, and WS Tsunami Warning Centers are now being shared with FEMA's National Response Coordination Center. The probability of catastrophic failure for the seawalls in San Francisco's Embarcadero and the port of Long Beach is now rated at 98%. These structures were engineered for a maximum sea level rise of 2 meters or a 5-meter storm surge. They are about to face an event that is 5 times their design limit. As the clock ticks towards the 8 a.m. hour, the data suggests that for the first time in American history, we are about to witness the literal reshaping of the Pacific coastline by a force that was, until this morning, considered a geological impossibility. The transition from data points on a monitor to the reality of human displacement is where the true horror of the April 2026 event begins. By 7:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the natural disaster alert has been pushed to every smartphone from nearby Washington to Imperial Beach, California. The message is blunt: tsunami danger, move inland to higher ground immediately. This is not a drill. But for many, the geography of the American West makes that instruction a logistical impossibility. In the port of Long Beach, Captain Julian Vance, a 54-year-old harbor pilot, is standing on the bridge of a 1,200-foot container ship, the MSC Alexandria. He has just received the Priority 1 override from the U.S. Coast Guard Sector Los Angeles-Long Beach. The order is to sortie to deep water, but Julian knows the math. To get a vessel of this draft out of the breakwater takes 45 minutes of slow maneuvering with tugs. There are currently 22 such vessels in the complex, which handles 40% of all U.S. containerized imports. If the 8-meter surge arrives while these ships are still in the narrow channels, they won't just sink, they will become multi-billion-dollar battering rams, leveled against the very gantry cranes that sustain the U.S. supply chain. Julian looks out at the forest of white and red cranes, the iron giants of San Pedro Bay. Each one costs $15 million and takes 2 years to manufacture. If the surge reaches the 10-meter mark, as the latest NOAA models suggest, the electrical motors and structural foundations of these cranes will be compromised by saltwater intrusion and kinetic force. The economic damage to the US economy from a Port of LA/Long Beach shutdown is estimated at $1 billion per day. Julian realizes he isn't going to make it to deep water. He orders his crew to the highest deck and prepares to anchor, knowing that a ship of 160,000 tons has a surface area that will catch the tsunami energy like a sail. In San Francisco, 32-year-old Elena Rodriguez is stuck in the morning commute on the lower deck of the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. Her phone is screaming with the EAS alert. She looks to her left through the steel girders at the calm, gray water of the bay. Most commuters around her are confused. There has been no earthquake. Many are staying in their cars, searching social media for answers. This is the inertia of the unfamiliar. Because the ground didn't shake, the biological fight-or-flight response hasn't been triggered. Elena, a former civil engineer for Caltrans, remembers the inundation maps. She knows that the Bay Bridge's touchdown in San Francisco is at an elevation of barely 3 meters. If the wave refracts through the Golden Gate, it will hit the Embarcadero and the bridge footings with a bore effect. She makes a split-second decision. She abandons her vehicle, screaming at others to do the same, and begins the half-mile sprint up the incline toward the Yerba Buena Island Tunnel. She is one of the few who understands that a car is a coffin in a tsunami zone. Further north, in Seaside, Oregon, the reality is even grimmer. Seaside is a town built on a sandbar, a community that has spent decades preparing for the big one, the Cascadia earthquake. Every schoolchild knows the evacuation route to the tsunami assembly area on the hills. But those plans assumed a tectonic event where the ground shakes first, providing an immediate 15-minute warning. On April 3, 2026, there is no shaking. The warning comes via siren and cell phone at 8:05 a.m. The nearest high ground is a 25-minute walk for an able-bodied adult. For the 400 students at Seaside Heights Elementary, it is a race against a clock they cannot see. Principal Sarah Jenkins initiates the Go Back protocol. She watches as teachers lead lines of children in reflective vests toward the hills. She looks at her watch, 8:22 a.m. The wave is projected to hit at 8:47 a.m. They are 10 minutes behind the curve. The logistical collapse is systemic. As millions of people attempt to flee inland, the primary arteries, I-5, Highway 101, and the Pacific Coast Highway, become gridlocked within 15 minutes. In Southern California, the bottleneck effect at the Laguna Canyon and the Santa Monica inclines traps thousands of vehicles in low-lying zones. The American telecom infrastructure is also failing. The surge in cellular traffic has overwhelmed the towers, but the deeper threat is the landing stations. Over 90% of all trans-Pacific internet traffic enters the United States through fiber optic cables that emerge from the sea at specific points like Grover Beach, California, and Bandon, Oregon. These stations, housed in unassuming concrete buildings near the shore, are at elevations of less than 5 meters. At 8:55 a.m., as the first wave train hits the Oregon coast, the heartbeat of the US-Asia data link goes dark. Banking systems, cloud computing, and emergency coordination channels that rely on these undersea links are instantly severed. The power grid enters a wet failure state. Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, and Southern California Edison, SCE, have dozens of coastal substations designed to withstand rain, but not total immersion in conductive salt water. As the surge hits, these substations don't just shut down, they explode in arcs of blue light, creating a blackout that rolls inland for 50 miles. This isn't just a loss of light, it's a loss of the pumps that provide fresh water to millions, and the cooling systems for industrial centers. By 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the first estimates of the Yakutat surge damage are being calculated by FEMA's HAZUS software. The numbers are astronomical. They are projecting 140,000 fatalities in the first 120 minutes of coastal impact across 3 states. The property damage is estimated at $1.2 trillion, making it the costliest natural disaster in US history by a factor of 5. This is the moment the American public realizes that infrastructure is not a political talking point. It is the thin, fragile line between a functioning society and a prehistoric struggle for high ground. The ice that fell in Alaska has reached the streets of Santa Monica, and the United States has no manual for what happens next. The immediate search of the April 3, 2026 Yakutat collapse has receded, but for the United States, the geography of the possible has been permanently altered. The weeks following the event reveal a nation grappling with a fundamental truth. Our coastal defense models were built for a planet that no longer exists. The economic and structural aftershocks are spreading through the American interior like a slow-motion tectonic rupture. At the port of Long Beach, the graveyard of the Iron Giants remains a tangle of twisted gantry cranes and partially submerged containers. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, USACE, estimates that clearing the primary shipping channels for the Los Angeles Long Beach complex will take 18 months and cost upwards of $45 billion. Because the sport complex serves as the primary entry point for 40% of all US imports, the Long Beach bottleneck triggers a secondary crisis, a 15% spike in the cost of consumer goods nationwide within 30 days. This isn't just a coastal disaster, it's a total systemic shock to the American heartland. In Central California, the Diablo Canyon power plant becomes a case study in near-miss engineering. While the primary containment structures held against the 10-meter surge, the plant's cooling water intake systems, designed for high-tide storm events, not 30-foot walls of debris-laden water, were instantly choked with millions of tons of sand, kelp, and structural wreckage. The plant entered an emergency scram state. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission now faces a terrifying reality. Dozens of spent fuel storage sites along the US coast, from San Onofre to the independent spent fuel storage installations in the Pacific Northwest, are currently sitting in red zones where the sea has not fully retreated. The salt water is corroding high-voltage electrical components and concrete foundations that were never meant for immersion. The next domino theory is what keeps the USGS Alaska Science Center in a state of permanent mobilization. The 3.9 cubic kilometer failure of the Hubbard Glacier has removed the literal physical brace for the surrounding landscape. Dr. Sarah Chen's latest report, issued in May 2026, identifies the Columbia Glacier near Prince William Sound as the next critical failure point. The bathymetry at Columbia is an exact mirror of what we saw at Hubbard, she warns. The ice is sitting on a retrograde slope that descends 600 meters below sea level. It is currently retreating into a deep basin. If the Hubbard collapse was the trigger, Columbia is the loaded chamber. The USGS has accelerated the installation of high-frequency radar and real-time GNSS arrays across every major tidewater glacier in the state. The data is clear. The ice isn't just melting, it is structurally destabilizing. On the US West Coast, the new normal is a landscape of managed retreat. In towns like Seaside, Oregon, and Imperial Beach, California, the 2026 surge has rendered thousands of homes uninsurable by any private carrier. The National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, is facing an insolvency crisis that threatens the stability of the entire US housing market. FEMA has begun the Blue Line Project, a federal mapping initiative that marks a new inland boundary for permanent habitation. Anything west of that line is being classified as a high-velocity hazard zone. We are witnessing the first large-scale internal migration in American history, driven not by economic opportunity, but by geophysical inevitability. The infrastructure of the Great Pacific Corridor is being reimagined under duress. Interstate 5 and the rail lines that carry the coast starlight are being rerouted further inland at a cost that the Congressional Budget Office estimates at $200 billion over the next decade. The saltwater wedge is another silent killer. In the Columbia River, the force of the tsunami pushed ocean water 100 miles inland, contaminating the freshwater intakes for dozens of Oregon and Washington municipalities. The desalination and repair of these systems is a task the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation describes as unprecedented in scope. Let's go back to the words of Elias Stone, the fisherman in Yakutat. He told rescuers that the ocean didn't look like the ocean anymore. It looked like the Earth was trying to turn itself inside out. Scientists see this in the data every day. The atmosphere is carrying more energy, the oceans are absorbing more heat, and the ice, the great mechanical stabilizer of our northern latitudes, is surrendering. This isn't a political debate or a theoretical model for the year 2100. It is a set of physical coordinates and velocity vectors that reached our shores on April 3, 2026. The cities of the Pacific Coast, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, were built on a foundation of stability that has been revealed as an illusion. The Yakutat collapse was not a black swan event. It was a predictable outcome of a coupled system under extreme stress. As we look toward the next year, the data indicates that more ice is moving, more slopes are weakening, and the Pacific is ready to transmit that energy again. The early warning systems are being rebuilt, the seawalls are being raised, but the fundamental math remains the same. The ice is moving, the water is coming. And our only defense is the cold, hard reality of the data. I am Daniel, this is Natural Disasters. If you live within 20 miles of a coastline, the Hubbard event is your new baseline. Share this information. Study the inundation maps, because when the next glacier sounds like it is surrendering, the only thing that will matter is how far you are from the blue line. Follow the data, stay safe. We will see you next time.